Okay, so Chodesh Tov, everybody. So we are continuing on with our study of Eruvin. We are on Daf Ayin Amud Aleph. So just to sum up what we've been doing until now, so we're trying to figure out when you have a bunch of people in the same courtyard and somebody forgot to be part of the Eruv. We're trying to figure out when can and can't they give up their rights to the other members of the courtyard in order to let everybody at various points in time carry based on it being belonging to one person. That's what we're trying to figure out. Is it possible for this to happen? And how would that work out? So now, so the Mishnah had, given cases, one person, two people, five people, who can give the rights to whom. Now we're talking about the case when you can't receive the permission. So if it ain't not blin rishon. Right now is when you can't accept the rights from another individual. So why do we have this statement separate from from other statements that we have in the Mishnah about who can take and can't give or can't give their rights to the courtyard to everybody else? So why do we need this? Lo tzricha. You need this statement as well. So this is saying, this is talking about the case of let's say there's three people in the courtyard. Can A negate to B, then negates to C? Are you allowed to do that or not? And this is saying that you can't do that. So if A negates to B, then negate to C, that's not a valid order of operations. That's what this phrase is teaching us. So Ba mine Abai mi Rabba. So Abai asked Rabba, is this really the case? We have five people in one courtyard. And one of them forgets, but four of them were part of the Eruv, the fifth one's not. So now, people in the courtyard, four contributed and are part of the Eruv, one forgot. The question is, what does he need to do? Is he able to negate each and every one of them or not? How would he go about it so that way everyone else can carry, even without ruining his ability to carry? Or how would this work out? The Rambam says that he has to negate his rights to each and every person individually. So now we're trying to figure out, how can you do that? So we learned in a different Braita that if one person forgot to join in, he can give his rights over to one of the other members of the courtyard. Chaim, or conversely, if there's two that had been part of the Eruv and one who was not, so he can also, so that both of them can negate the one person. Ushnaim shelo irvu notin rishutan l'shnaim she'irvu or lachad shelo irev. In the case, let's say where two made an Eruv and two did not. So then the two that did not make an Eruv each give the rights to two that had, meaning each of them would negate to one other person. Or that two people who had it, who made an Eruv, can negate to one other individual. But from this Braita, we see that you can't negate to multiple individuals. This is saying that one person can give the rights to one other person, but that's the limit. So, and continuing on, not only that, but a person who did not make an Eruv, but a person who had made the Eruv, who was part of it, can't be the only one to give to the individual. And you can't have two people who were part of the Eruv give it up to two people who are not part of the Eruv. And also, two people who did not make an Eruv can't give their rights to the two others that did not make an Eruv. So we're going to try to unpack that whole thing, when you can and can't, how that relates, because this last Braita versus our first one seems to be going against each other in terms of how many people can negate to how many others. And we're trying to figure out what's actually going on here, because there's a lot of moving parts, and also they seem to be impossible to reconcile. So what do we do? Tani Mihat Reisha. So let's go back to the first clause and look at that. So Echad Shelo Erev, Notne Rishuto Lachad She'erev. Let's do it one by one. So one person forgot to be part of the Eruv. He can give up his rights to somebody who was part of the Eruv. So how would that work? Hechidami. Idalek Achrena Bahade, Bahade Man Erev. So if there's only two people in question, then wait, then who do you make an Eruv with and what's going on here, right? We're trying to figure out like what's the situation, because do you have to negate to every single person or to one? And we say you had an Eruv, so how do you have an Eruv if there's nobody else there besides you? Like, how do you have an Eruv Chatzerot if there's nobody else you're sharing the courtyard with? That doesn't make much sense. Morning Shraga. So Kani Mihat Reisha. We are discussing the case of many people living in the courtyard, question of who can negate to whom and how they would do it. Came of one negate. We're trying to figure out, are you allowed to have one person negate to one person, or do you have to negate to everybody else who's residing in the courtyard? And how does that fit? We have two braitas that seemingly will not allow anything to work between the two of them. We're trying to figure out how this is going to work, and also how this relates to our Mishnah as well. So I'll read it. So Tani Mihat Reish again. So the first part of the Beit said as follows: that if somebody did not make an Eruv, so he can give his rights to somebody who was part of the Eruv. But that also implies that there must have been multiple people in the Chatzer who were part of the Eruv, because if not, how could he have made an Eruv? Normally, an Eruv implies that there's multiple people joined together. So how did that work? So Elab Shita the Ikach Rina Ba'adei Uktani Lachad She'irei. Or rather, what must the case be is that there's at least three people in this courtyard, two of whom are part of the Eruv and one of whom is not. And it says that all you have to do is give the rights up to one person, which implies you don't, which is against what we stated earlier, you have to give it to negate to each and every person. So Barabba, Hava Umid. Then how does Rabba solve the issue of how you normally should negate to every person individually, yet how in this case you're not? So he says what happened is that the third person died. So that's how you get around it. Okay. So it is one way of saying it, and that's why there's only one person left. Okay. But then our question is Idahava Umate Ema Seifa. But if we're talking about where there were three people and then one of them died, then this case is the same as the last half of the Braita, where it says, where we have a person who part of the Eruv can't give his rights up to the other person, right? Because there were three. This explains why somebody who had the Eruv can't give up his rights to the person who had not made the Eruv, because he can't give over the rights for the dead person. He can't do that. So, right, the E Dahava Umate, my love. But again, if the person had died, then why can't the person negate? There's only two people involved right now, so you should be able to give up your right. So Elab Shita Deite. Rather, it must be that there really is at least three people here, right? There's two people who are part of the Eruv, and then there's a person who is not part of the Eruv. So Midaseifa Ite, Reisha Nami Ite. And then since in the Seifa, in order for that to make any sense, for you to say there's somebody who's part of the Eruv still, there must be at least three individuals total. Two of them are part of the Eruv, one is not. Therefore, the Reisha, there also has to be at least three individuals. Two are part of the Eruv and one was not. Or the whole thing wouldn't be working. So, media aria. So, is this really the case for both of them? Hakadita, Hakadita. No, so maybe you could say that each and every case in our Beit is different, and that they don't all necessarily have there being multiple people involved in the Eruv. Maybe you have an Eruv of only one person in one of the cases. So, right, so Teda, the Ketani Seifa Deresha, as it states in the last half of the first part, Ushnaim Shalo Irvu, no din Rishutan Lishnaim She'irvu, Lishnaim in Lechad Lo. All right, so then we're trying to figure out, wait, is that really the case? That there's multiple people who have that could work? Because it says also that if there's two people who didn't make an Eruv, then the they can give the rights to two people who are part of the Eruv, which implies that if there's two people who were part of the Eruv, will this work? That each of them only move out to one person. If there's two people who had not made an Eruv, and there's only one person who was still a part of and is part of the Eruv, that would not work. So then how do we explain that then? Because that implies that you can only have one person to one person, not two people to one person. Abai says no, it's not a problem. Because when we say l'shnayim, we don't mean that you have to necessarily give up the rights to two people, but that it's one of two people. So that's how we explain why you can negate to an individual without negating to everybody all at once, and that'll still work. Well, then it should have said that those two people can negate to a person who made an Eruv, or to two people who did not, or sorry, to one who was part of the Eruv, or one who is not part of the Eruv. So the language is imprecise. So that can't really be correct then. So I think it seems like Abai is wrong. So now we're still confused. So let's try this again. So now we're going to explain the other part of the BAYT, which will hopefully make a little bit more sense as far as how many people can negate to how many other people. So now we're saying there's only one person who's left out, as opposed to the two cases we were talking about before. We were saying, can that work or not? So we're saying this is one person who's not part of the Eruv. He can give his rights to one of the people who are part of the Eruv, and that'll solve the problem. So BAYT. So by this works because there's one other person there. But Kamash Malan, what would you have thought otherwise? The Ein Tarif Levatel Rashut L'Kol Chad V'Echad. You may have thought that you don't need, and therefore we learn over here that you don't need to negate to every individual person. Here's where the source for Abai's opinion that you can simply, the person who was not part of the Eruv can simply negate to any one of the other individuals who were part of the Eruv, and that's fine. He doesn't need to say, I negate to everybody else individually, call them out. Rather, you can pick one person saying that you have all my rights, and since he's part of the group, then we're good. But L'Rabba Dehava me, but Rabba says that you can't do that. It says you have to give the rights to every individual. So the only case for him where that could occur is if there were three people. Two people were part of the Eruv and one not. And one of them had died, who were part of the Eruv. And then he's saying that there was no of thinking that you'll start being the Batal Rishus in a case where there's multiple people still alive for the Eruv. So that's how you say it, is that according to Rabbah, the extension of the when you can negate is very limited, basically only in the case of where there were three people in total in the courtyard, one of whom the two of them had been part of the Eruv, and then one of those two had died. So, and that's simply how you have to say it, and that's simply all of that Rabbah's case is limited to now. So that's what you have to say according to Rabbah. So now we're going to keep analyzing the Breita to see what are the other cases where you can and can't give rights. Again, this is very technical and confusing, but this is why generally it's very much advised to make sure that everybody is part of your area before Shabbos, because if not, it's a little messy. So Ushnayim she'irvu nodin rashutan lachad shelo yirei. But if you have so now when you have two people who are part of the Eruv, right, and then there's a third person who's not part, so the people who are part of the Eruv can give up the rights to the individual who is not part, who did not make the Eruv. Pshita, it's not obvious that they can give up the rights.
Bless you.
What would you have thought? So why do we need this statement? Because we may have thought that once the person wasn't part of the Eruv, we won't let him carry at all. We won't let them give him the rights. So, and there's a fine midrabanan that he's not allowed to get control now. So Kamash Malan is that if the other people agree that they're allowed to negate the single individual. That itself will create its own host of problems because he can't give it back to them. But if it happened that they're finished using the courtyard and he wants to use it, then they could do that scenario. So okay, so now we're going to continue on the right of the neck for the next case. So Ushnayim Shalo Ervu, no in Rishutan L'Shnayim Shervu. Now there's 4 people, 2 of whom were part of the Erev, 2 of whom were not. So we say that the 2 that had not been part of the Erev, we give up the rights to the 2 that had made an Erev. That'll enable people to carry in general. So now let's touch that. So what does this teach us about the rest? So L'Rabba Tana Seifa L'Gilui Reisha. So according to Rabbah, the latter clause helps us with the first clause, meaning that just like the latter clause teaches us that you must renounce every individual. So here too, you need to renounce every single individual. Right, because it's 2 to 2, so that implies that they're both giving up the rights to both of them at once. L'Abaye, Chaim Shalo Yervu is Drichalei. So, but according to Baye, it's only needed when there's 2 people who did not make an Erev. You need to do this. You need to mention this. No. You may have thought that we're worried that you're going to confuse the cases of giving your rights up before Shabbos versus the case of Bittul, meaning it's because you can be noted Rishut before Shabbos, but you can't be Matal Rishut with multiple people on Shabbos. So basically, you get confused between giving up your rights before Shabbos versus being Matal Rishut on Shabbos. So Kamash Malan, that we're confident that you won't get confused, and therefore we don't forbid you from doing so on Shabbos. So I would say that odds are I would get confused, but seemingly Abai has far more faith in our abilities than I do. As far as remembering when you're allowed and not allowed to give up your rights. Okay, so that's how it would work. So the Ol Echad She'irev. Then we continue on in the BAYT, saying that you're allowed to give up your rights to somebody who did not make the Eruv. So we're trying to figure out, wait, so how is that working out, right? So why do we need this? Isn't this already assumed from the previous statements? Why do we need this extra statement of they could give it to only one individual? Like, isn't that applied by the other ones? So what do you need it for? May have thought this only applies when a minority made an error, and a minority did not make an error. No. So you may have thought that the whole concept we said about allowing people to successfully give up rights is assuming that some people are responsible and actually remember to make an error. That's when we allow you to start doing this. A negates to B, who negates to C, or this other complicated business is only if you try to make an error before Shabbos. But we won't let you get it. But if everybody fell asleep at the wheel, nobody made an error, so let me say this doesn't work. So Kamash Malan is saying that no, even if nobody was prepared, we're not going to say that zero b'drabanan, we won't let you do this negation of rights and renouncing of your rights because maybe you'll forget to make an error next time. We're really confident that you'll remember for next time because, well, this is difficult as we're all being confused here trying to figure this out. So odds are, once they realize all of the complications involved, they probably won't do it next time, so it's okay. So now about the one case when you're not allowed to do it. So about ein echad she'irev noten reshuto l'echad shelo irev. Now the case is when you have one person who had been part of the Erev, so he can't give his rights to the one who did not. We're trying to figure out why is that. So l'baye on a seifa l'gilui reisha. So this works according to Baye because now this part is explaining the first part of the BAYT, meaning that this is explaining that a person can renounce his rights to one person without having to specify every individual, and this is working out, and that's what this teaches us. The Rabbah ID the Tanaresha Tanamasefa. According to Rabbah, we don't learn anything new. Rather, it's just that we're trying to have parallel language in the BAYT, right? So it's not so that obviously this is the case because you'd have to you'd have to tell both people the same, to give your rights up to both people, which we already explained on the first part of the BAYT. But so here it's simply stating it because it started with pairs and now it's doing individuals, but not because there's anything new, just because parallel language. So, and that's what explained that variance in the BAYT. Okay. And everything, there's two individuals who have been part of the Eruv, can't give it to two people who are not part of the Eruv. So wait, so what do we need this for? Isn't this implied by the previous statement? No, you still need it. Why? Because what happened is that one of the people who had been part of the Eruv give the rights to the other person who's part of the Eruv. They thought now that the person who's been part of the Eruv had given up to the other person who's part of the Eruv, that he's allowed to do so. Sorry, I said that, I read that wrong. What happens? So the order is operating as follows. So what if you have the two people who hadn't been part of the Eruv? One of them had negated to the other person who's also not part of the Eruv, right? So they tried doing that first, right? So you may think that would make it easier, because now it's like the case of where there's two people who are part of the Eruv getting to one. So should we say that works now? So rather would you say that since at the time when the first, so again, we have two people who are not part and two people who are part of the Eruv. Since when the person who's not part of the Eruv, the other person is not part of the Eruv, neither of them had usage rights. So later on, when the two people who are part of the Eruv give the rights to one or both of the individuals who weren't part of the Eruv, will not be allowed to carry, because these two individuals forbid each other from usage. So the concept of negation is only useful for the purposes when there's, in this case, if there's only one person who had not been part of the Eruv, but now there's two. So, okay. But now continue on with the BAYT. Ve'ein shnayim shelo irvu notnin refutan l'shnayim shelo irvu. Now we're saying there's two people who would not made an Eruv. They can't give their rights to two other individuals who also have been made part of the Eruv. So let's say now there's four people in the courtyard. So they're saying that you can't have two of them give the rights to the other two. So Hatulamali. So why are we stating that this doesn't work either? So no, because what may have happened is there's four people here, so they want to do in order to make sure that eventually somebody in the courtyard can carry. So they want to have one person negate to somebody else, who then negates to the other people. So they want to do like a multi-tiered stage of bittul. So we want to prevent that from happening. And therefore, we're telling you that you can't do that. You'd have to have each of them, each individually would have to negate to one person, or it's not going to work. Right? So that's what we're looking at from here, is that you can't have the I negate to you will then negate to another person. Rather, you have to directly negate your rights to the person who you want it to be used, you have use of it in the end. Okay. Again, so this is all about the case of who you can and can't give reshut to. So the principles involved were that you have to give up your rights to somebody who is either an individual or a member of either one person who's not part of the Eruv, or the person who's not part of the Eruv would have to give up to the people, up to a member of the collective. And then there's a machlok between Abaye and Rabbah whether or not you have to, when you're the person who's not part of the Eruv, you have to negate your rights to one person, and therefore that's good, or you have to expressly negate to every individual in the courtyard or not. Okay, so those were the rules and a whole bunch of cases and issues that came up, and that section we're just talking. We had been talking about.
So, Rabbi, sorry, just can I interrupt for 1 sec?
Please.
So I just want to get grounded in the fundamentals, because the reason we're worried about all these different permutations and combinations is that let's say you have 10 people all sharing the same chaser, okay, all going to the same courtyard, and 2 of the 10 for whatever reason they're not religious, but they don't want to participate. So because they're not part of it, we can't get the status of an effective Eruv within the Chatzir. I mean, is that basically it? And why, like, what gives them the power to do that? Why can't the 8 who contributed to the Eruv just, be part of the Eruv? So I guess you need some of the completeness. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. Is that basically it?
Correct. You need everybody to be part of it in order for it to work. So there are ways around it. The person's,
They fulfill their rights. Okay.
Right. There's also other tricks. Let's say if you have we were talking about like if you have a usage of the other person's home, then you don't need theirs already. Then you don't need to specifically need their permission for the Eruv. So that's, let's say, if you're making one of those small Eruvs, so you can simply say your neighbor, who's not religious and would have no part of the Eruv, you can say you lend him something on a long-term basis. Mind holding on to my key for me, right? And so then once you have a usage of part of his house, then he's already technically part of your usage. And therefore you don't need to get explicit permission because he implicitly gave permission to you already.
And that's how we accomplish it today about the authorities' access to everyone's house. Is that
correct? We go above their heads. That way nobody can possibly get in the way, right? Let's say there's somebody who wants to be makbid and say, I don't want to carry for Eruvin. The answer is that his protestations won't matter because the government official supersedes his not wanting to be part of the Eruv.
And this applies to Jews and non-Jews alike, it doesn't?
Correct. Jews and non-Jews, right? So it solves the issue of for non-Jews, it's easier to circumvent because that's, but for Jews, it will be harder to, but the government access circumvents even, let's say, if, a lot of the times the person who's the hardest to convince is a non-religious Jew. So this solves that issue because it means that you don't have to go simply to ask anybody to do so, rather it just bulldozes it over.
It sounds like the cases we're talking about here are like one-offs where for some reason they were making an Eruv every Eruv Shabbos and someone forgot, as opposed to someone who said they don't want to be part of it on an ongoing basis. So you wouldn't have done these other things because you're expecting them to be involved. So does someone have to positively say they're going to be part of the Eruv every Eruv Shabbos? Or because we're saying they forgot. So you have to confirm it?
You're supposed to, you could assume if he was in the part of the Eruv last week, he's going to be in part of it this week. But the problem is that you have to have collected sufficient amount of food from every person in order for it to go for it to include everybody. A lot of times, this person might not remember to contribute their food. We're assuming here is that everybody's poor, and therefore they have to contribute every week, or the Eruv won't be kosher.
You can't just use the one box of matzah or something like that.
That assumes that you're rich enough to afford to have a spare box of matzahs.
Okay.
It doesn't but an Eruv is only one box of matzahs. It's like, thank God we're rich enough that we think that it's just a box of matzahs. Back then, that's your food for the week.
Okay, understood.
So as in the answer is nobody can afford that, and that's what happened with the Bayan Rava and the hot water case. So how does such great individuals, how do you not have an Eruv? The answer is very poor, and that's really it. That was it.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you, Michael, for raising the questions.
Please do. All questions are always helpful, and thank you. Okay, so now we're going to get to another interesting permutation of what happens. We mentioned somebody passed away, so now what's going to happen if somebody passed away on Shabbos, and we're trying to transfer rights? How's this going to work? So, Ba'amine Rava Mirav Nachman Yorish Ma'ushi Avatal Rashut. So what happens if? So normally we've been talking until now about the head of the household negating his rights. What happens if somebody passes away on Shabbos? Can a member of their household then transfer the rights for the rest of the household on Shabbos? Is he allowed to do that or not? So now turning on to Beit. So Between Nami Matzi Mavatel, of a high came in the E by Eruvin Matmo, Lo Matzi Marev, Lo Matzi Mavatel. Do we say that it should have worked? Because yesterday this individual was the one who had control of the rights, and it only got it on Shabbos when the individual who did have the used rights passed away, so therefore he can't transfer it. And therefore, now that he even though he has the rights as Shabbos now, since he couldn't make the error before Shabbos, he can't. So therefore, it means that you're stuck. Dilma Yorish Kare Davo, or do we say that the person who's inheriting is as if he was part of the person who passed away's father? He's part of his father's foot is the literal translation. Meaning, do we say that just like his father could have, so too can the son later? And again, so again, in terms of the error, we're not saying that every individual person necessarily has to state their part of the error. The head of the household can operate on behalf of everybody else in the household. So the problem here is that when the head of the household passed away, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to work out now, because the son couldn't have done it prior because he didn't have the rights to, only his father could have. But now he's de facto in charge because his father passed away. So how does this work? So Amar Lay, so Rav Nachman answers, Ani Omer Mevatel. Ani Debe Shmuel Tayo Ani Mevatel. So Rav Nachman says, I say that he could be Mevatel Rishut, the heir, but I know that as Shmuel teaches that you can't. Itve. Now Rav is going to say, wait, so why would you say that are you allowed to be a Mevatel? So what is it? You can or you can't. So here's a general that'll help us. So Zach Klal. Kol shemutar l'mixat Shabbat hutar l'kol Shabbat kol shene'asar l'mixat Shabbat ne'asar l'kol Shabbat chutz mivatel reshut. So we generally say that if anybody was mutter to carry a part of Shabbos, then they're allowed to carry for the rest of Shabbos as well. If they were forbidden for part of Shabbos, then it's considered to be forbidden for the rest of Shabbos as well, with the exception of somebody who's being mivatel reshut, because that's allowed to be done where you can renounce your rights on the Shabbos. It's the one case where you can renounce. So now we're trying to figure out so how does that apply to our case here, right? So now what does that statement imply? Kol shutar l'mixat Shabbat, mutar l'kol Shabbat. So whenever something was mutar for part of Shabbos, it's mutar for the rest of Shabbos as well. So such as which case? Keep going. Erev to Derech Petach. Let's say you've made an error between two locations by way of the doorway. And you close the doorway. So there's a case where let's say in order to make an error into errors, it has to be an access point. So even if it had been open from the outside of Shabbos, even if it had been closed later, we still say your error will work. So therefore, that's what it's teaching us, right? What's additionally learned out? So what's the most inclusive case of this comes to include? The case where you had removed the lechi or the korah on Shabbos, right? Because normally, let's say you have a mavoi that again normally you can't carry there on Shabbos without fixing the courtyard in some way, which means you put a lechi or a korah to remind you that it differentiated from the Rishut Harabim. So, right. So if one of the fixes fell down, then now it would still be much for the rest of Shabbos, right? So this is referring to a mavoi. For as far as that works for different types of errors, we'll leave that aside for now. But this is saying the case of the for the lechi and the korah that fell down, it says that you're still allowed to carry for the rest of Shabbos. Kol shene'asar l'mixat Shabbat, ne'asar kol Shabbat kula. And that which the BAYT stated that if you're forbidden for carrying for part of Shabbos, you're forbidden to carry for all of Shabbos. What's that case? Could go in shnei batim b'shnei tzir shutarabim v'kifum goyim b'chitzim Shabbat. The case where we say that once it was forbidden, it remains forbidden. So that's talking about the case of where you'd had two people living on two sides of the Rishut Harabim. And non-Jews decided to put up walls on Shabbos, blocking off the Rishut Harabim, so therefore enclosing the two houses. But could you carry in that part of the yard? And the answer is no. It's still forbidden because this was forbidden by the outset of Shabbos. The walls appeared now will not allow you to suddenly treat it as if it's very shitty. So what do we learn from this general rule part of this statement? Even if a non-Jew passes away on Shabbos, you'll still be prohibited from carrying on Shabbos. Even though it's only Xer Banan of you learn from his actions, we still say that this is still that's still a problem once you're not allowed to have once you couldn't carry on Shabbos. Therefore, you still can. So now we're finally into the part that we wanted for our question in the Gemara, which is and when it says this is except for the case of a person who can be Mevatel Rashut. So what does that teach us? So again, sorry for the very long aside, but Gemara, as this is Derek will explain the whole thing, not just quote the part that's necessarily what that it was looking for, because once they quoted it, you should know the full context of what it's explaining. So the case where you can't so what's another case that can't work is the case that works sometimes, not always, is the case of somebody who negates their rights, right? That's one of the few things when you have been forbidden on Shabbos, you can still but you can still again become mutter if somebody gives up the rights entirely. So, and who's allowed to do this? Ihuin Yoresh Lo. The person who's originally part of the Chatzer is the person who can give up his rights on Shabbos, but his inheritor could not. And that answers our question of can the inheritor give up his rights? The answer is no, he can't. So Ema was Torah Bittul Rashud. So then Rav Nachman, on the other hand, that wouldn't work for him because he says that the Yoresh could. So what does he say? And instead he interprets that part of the Beit, he says that no, everybody's able to be Batal Rishus on Shabbos at any point. It's not saying that it's referring to the original individuals. It's simply talking about in general that you can always do Batal Rishus on Shabbos. So now we're going to question we're still trying to figure out can a Yoresh be Batal Rishus or not, because seemingly like our ironclad proof that we just brought, seemingly we've not had an answer for it. So let's try again. So this is another question by Rava. So so if a person in the courtyard had died and had given his rights to somebody else who lived, meaning somebody who's not part of the Chatzer. So mibod yom oser. So if you've given over his rights before Shabbos, then oser, meaning that means that nobody in the courtyard can carry because he had given up his rights to somebody who's not part of the Eruvin part of the courtyard. But if he's given his rights after Shabbos already set in, that wouldn't be a problem. Because that means that for part of Shabbos, like let's say that he's giving upon his passing, he says that all my rights go to, my name, so and so lives, the courtyard over. It's posted in my courtyard. So then that would mean so if you passed away before Shabbos, that would have created a problem. But if you passed away on Shabbos, everybody else would still be allowed to carry. Similarly, if Asab min hashuk shemei, and similarly, if somebody who wasn't part of the courtyard had given his rights to somebody else who lived in the courtyard, and then if he died before Shabbos, so that it was not created, then we'd have no issues of use of the courtyard on Shabbos because it's currently controlled by people who live in the courtyard and are part of it. But if he passed away afterwards, then it'd be a problem because he was not part of the era before Shabbos. Now it's still an issue. So my oser. Wait. So why are we saying that there'll be oser for people in the courtyard? So why are you saying that's forbidden for people in the courtyard? Let the inheritor negate, and then it'll be okay. My oser, not miktani achavatel. So the answer is that you can simply say that I'll negate it in a little while, and that's how it'll work. Therefore, we don't necessarily have a conclusive case for our case. We still haven't figured out whether our Nachman's right or Rabba's right. Okay, so I think we'll continue with the Tashima tomorrow. So let's just quickly sum up what we did because it was a little confusing. Okay, so we discussed two topics today. One of negation of rights in general, and when can you do it, and to how many people, and to whom. So that was when you negate your right, you're supposed to negate to a single individual. Machlok between a Bayan and Rabba, whether you negate to every individual other person in the courtyard or just to one person. And we also had a debate of how many people can be involved for this to work. And then how many stages can be involved? Can everybody only give up their rights once to one individual or to one group, or can you do it multiple times to include that you can only give your rights once, meaning in one sequence, right? So that was what we had concluded from this statement. Many of them had previous statements that there are other opinions that say you can do multiple negations, but in our case today, we're saying that you could not do multiple negations. Multiple people can negate once to an individual or to a group, but you can't do that A negates to B, then negates to C. That is considered to be invalid. Lastly, we were discussing the case of can a inheritor negate, and we said that he can. And we haven't concluded that yet. We're still trying to figure out can he negate to another person or not, and we were trying to figure out maybe it had something to do with the fact that he could have done it before or could not have done it before, and we still have yet to come to conclusion because all of our proofs could be read both ways, and therefore we still don't know the conclusion to an inheritor giving up his rights, and can he give his rights on Shabbos or not.
I just want to say thank you, by the way. I know it's probably taking you more effort and more calories to slow down, but it's much better for me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't know how everybody else feels, but
happy that everybody's following that. Okay, tomorrow.
Well, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not a committee or anything like that. I don't know how Ellie and
okay. That's good. Tomorrow's 6:40. Okay.
6:40. Go ahead.
6:40.
Thank you.
Okay. Go to everybody.
Great day.
Great day.